is that we learn from their mistakes. See, we have a tendency to become like our parents, even if we don't want to. We've all had that moment when we said something, when we did something, and we're like, oh no, that was dad. Or, oh no, that was mom. Right? We see our parents in ourselves. We've all had that moment. So one of the ways that we can honor our parents is by learning from their mistakes and doing differently. We as a congregation this year are seeking to live our lives 100% by the Bible. And that's a challenging task. It really is a challenging task, and it's a broad task. And because of that, we as a congregation have kind of set aside different topics out of which to kind of focus as we seek to come to the pages of Scripture and say, okay, how do we live this thing out? What does this practically look like? So one of the things that we have done is we've selected family. Family is a very touchy topic, right? I mean, anytime you start talking about something as practical as family, anything as everyday life as family, it's going to get kind of touchy. There's going to be times when we come to the pages of Scripture and we come to figure out, okay, what does God ask of us when in our family life, that we're going to look back and say, man, I messed up. I didn't do that right. And that may cause in us some grief. That may cause in us some heartache. And that's okay. But I want us to remember something, and I've talked about this before as we've dived into this deep subject of family, is we have the reality of what happens. And it's okay that we mess up. It's okay that we fail. And we need to understand what the ideal is, what Scripture holds up as the reality. But we need to remember that we serve a God who deals with the reality. Family's messy. The issue of family is complicated. It's not a simple thing, right? But God knows that. Where's the perfect family found in Scripture? I think it's 1 Opinions chapter 1. And if you haven't figured that out yet, there is no 1 Opinions chapter 1. The Bible does not have a perfect family. There is no perfect family found in the pages of Scripture. We serve a God who is able and willing and longs to step into the sticky situations in which we find ourselves and to redeem those situations, to breathe life into those situations. And we as the church need to not only understand the ideal, we do need to understand what the ideal is, what that standard is, but we also need to understand what the reality is. And we need to be willing and able to come alongside families who are hurting, who are struggling, and to lovingly and kindly say, we serve a God who understands, who is able to deal with those situations and to seek to redeem them. Because that's the God we serve. And isn't that wonderful? So as we dive into this issue of family over the next couple of weeks, and as we've already done so, if you find yourself looking at the pages of Scripture going, man, I messed up there, I failed in that point, I need you to remember this aspect that God is a redemptive God. And it's okay to mourn the fact that maybe I messed up, but we've all messed up in all these different areas of our life. And family is no different. Now, one of the things that we need to keep in mind as well as we look at this issue of family is that family matters. Family is extremely important. It is the building block of society, and upon the family rests everything. Out of a good marriage comes a good family. Out of a good family comes a good church. Out of a good church comes a good society, a good community. Out of a good community comes a good state. Out of a good state comes a good nation. And out of a good nation comes a good world. Everything can be boiled down to the bedrock issue of family. So though it might seem simple at first, what we find then is something that affects every area of our life. It's not just though affecting our homes, it affects our communities, it affects the world around us. And as we look at the issue of family, we also need to remember the fact that God is the one who instituted family. This is not a construct that came out of a need to support one another. This is not something we made up. God Himself is the one who instituted the family. He is the one who created it. So He's the one who gets to tell us how it should look. Okay, that's an important point that we need to remember, that God is the one who instituted the family. God is the one who guided that. Now, there's one other important point that we need to understand as we move into the study of family, as we continue in the study of family. So if you would, turn in your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1, and we're going to kind of do a quick survey of the book of Ephesians to find an important point when it comes to our study of family. Ephesians chapter 1, starting in verse 5. I'm going to actually start just a few words before in the beginning of the sentence. In love, He presented us for adoption as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of His will. So according to Paul, as he writes to the Ephesians church, he says that we, when we were saved, were adopted in by God. God Himself took us from a slave, took us from rebellion, and through salvation, He makes us sons through adoption. Now, this is a wonderful truth. This is a wonderful thing that we have the opportunity to be adopted in as sons. Now, this should not be surprising to us. When we look at the pages of Scripture, as we go throughout the story of the Bible, we find God referring to Himself as Father. So it should not be surprising that He then sees us as His children. If we turn over to Ephesians chapter 2, and we look in verse 19, we see the same thing here. So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens, saints, members of the household of God. So not only then are we adopted in to the family, but we become a member of the household. We're a member of the family of God. God allows us, gives to us the benefits of the family, of His family, His resources, His abilities. We have all of those things at our disposal. And what a wonderful truth that is, that we've been brought into the household, into the family of God. Now let's look over at Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to pick up our reading here in verse 22. There's a lot here, but we'll just kind of hit some of the highlights here. He says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is head of the church, His body, and gave Himself up as its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, you should love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her, that He might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that He might present the church to Himself without blemish, or spot, or wrinkle, in any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one has ever hated his own flesh, but he nourishes it, cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of His body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am saying that this refers to Christ and the church. However, let each of you love his wife as himself, and the wife shall see that she respects her husband." There's a lot here. There's a lot that we could study. In fact, we could probably study this for several weeks. But there's some important point that we need to bring out of this. The church and its relationship to Jesus is compared to a wedding, to a marriage. The church, us, are married to God, to Christ. What a wonderful thing that is. And as we look at this concept, what we see is that the church is referred to and talked about in terms of a family. This is not just some nice phrase. This is not something we just put on a postcard. This is not something we just use in advertisement. This is reality. We're family. With all of our wrinkles, with all of our spots, with all of our blemishes, with all of the difficulties we have, we are family. And we need to remember that. So as we study the family and we see all the intricacies and all the difficulties that we have, we're not just talking about our home life, we're also talking about the church. We're talking about how do we interact with one another. So the study of family is not just something that takes place within the home. This isn't just referring to how do I deal with those who are blood relationship to me. This is talking about us. Here at the Loveland Church of Christ, we are family. That's not just some nice phrase that we say. We're related. And just like our family, we don't get to choose them. We don't get to choose each other. We're just stuck with one another. We got to learn to put up with the family of God. And that's an okay thing. And it's a struggle at times, and that's all right. But we should see it as a joy. So it's important for us as we work through this study of family that we understand that the church is a family. And that this study not only affects our families, our homes, but it affects us as a church. Now, this morning, what I want us to actually study is children. Now, some of you are looking around going, most of them just left to the Bible hour. Why are we going to talk about kids? Shouldn't we bring them back in? No, keep in mind what we just talked about. We are a family. So it's not just us as parents needing to understand what God expects of our children, but we need to understand what God is expecting of us because we are part of this family of God. So we're children of God. We need to understand what God expects of us, right? We need to understand that children are a blessing. So often in our society, we see kids as kind of a curse, kind of a challenge, right? Now, we've come a long way from the days where children were to be seen and not heard. Right? We've come a long way from that. But as I listen to people talk in and out of the church, I find phrases like, once I had kids, my life was over. I used to have fun, and then I had kids. Right? One of my favorites is, you want some kids? I got a couple. I'll give you. Right? And within the church, we even have this deal when, a family gets up to 3, 4 kids, heaven forbid. We start saying, well, do you know how that happens, right? Right? How I couldn't do that. I couldn't have that many kids. I mean, they just wear me out. Now, I get that kids are challenging. Raising somebody, interacting with people on a regular basis, it's hard. But we need to see kids as a blessing. They truly are a blessing. And we need to change our mindset. We need to change our speech. We put off having kids way too long. We seek to limit ourselves in how many blessings God gives us. So we need to see children as a blessing. Maybe we need to see each other as a blessing. Because heaven forbid we bring somebody in who is an outsider and we convert them and we teach them the gospel and they take our pew. Right? They upset the balance of the family. So what does God expect of children? What is God's expectation of kids? Well, I hope you're still there in Ephesians, because turn over to chapter 6. In Ephesians chapter 6, starting there in verse 1, we read, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live a long time in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord." So when we look at what God expects of children, one of the first things that we see is they are to be obedient. Now, based upon the context here, he's talked to mothers, he's talked to fathers, he's now turned his attention to little children. So the first instruction that Paul has for kids is this: when you're in your parents' home, when you're under their authority, when you're under their guidance, you are to be obedient. You are to obey them. That is the number one commandment to small kids. Obey your parents. Now that might be hard. Some of you are like, ah. Now here's the flip side to that. Once you're out of their home, once you're off on your own, you don't have to obey them anymore. Some of you are like, yahoo! Right? But when you're under their control, when you're in their home, You're under their leadership. You're under their authority, so you have to obey them. Now, there, of course, is the normal stipulation that you are to obey God rather than man. So if your parents tell you to break the law, if they tell you to break the commandments of God, you're to obey God rather than man, right? Just like we would with the government, right? But by and large, as far as it depends upon us, we are to be obedient to our parents. We're to trust their judgment, trust their guidance. We are to be obedient to them as long as we can, as far as we can. That is our job as children, to be obedient. So then us as the family of God, as children, we are to be obedient to God, right? We are under His leadership. We are under His guidance. We are under His authority. And we need to not see that in a negative light. Now, Paul goes even further. He says, now honor your father and your mother. And he's directly quoting here from the Ten Commandments. So let's jump back over there to Exodus chapter 20. Turn over to Exodus chapter 20. We're going to look in verse 12. He says, now honor your father and your mother, that the days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. Now, this might seem really elementary, but sometimes I think we need to remind ourselves. The Ten Commandments were not given to the Torah Bible Hour group. Right? They're on Mount Sinai. They were not giving the Ten Commandments to the kids. The Ten Commandments were given to the entire nation of Israel. They were given to the adults. And when God gets to this commandment, He's not turning His attention from the adults to the kids and saying, all right, now you guys need to obey your parents. He's turning to the entire group and says, now honor your father and your mother. And last I checked, once we got to a certain age, our parents didn't stop being our parents. So this applies to all of us. Right? So the question then becomes, what does it mean to honor? What is this concept of honor? Well, the word means to give great weight to. And the idea is that of scales, right? You give great weight to what your parents say. You give great weight to their opinion. Doesn't mean you obey them. It means you give great weight to what they say. So those of you who are like, yes, I get to disobey my parents. I'm out of the house. I don't have to obey them anymore. Yeah, but you do have to honor them. Well, how do you honor them? You honor them by giving great weight to what they say, even when you're out of the house. When Dad puts his arm around you and says, son, I think you're going in the wrong direction. I think you really need to do this, 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 and this. Doesn't mean you have to obey him. But it does mean you have to give great weight to what he says, to the direction that he's giving to you. You have to honor him. Now, for some of us, that's really easy. We have good parents. We have a good family life. And it might not be perfect. We have our flaws. We have our challenges. But by and large, we have good, honorable parents. They give some pretty good advice most of the time. I can see the wisdom. I can see where they're coming from. But what happens when we have parents who aren't good? Maybe if we're quite honest, our parents are scoundrels. Maybe they don't know the Lord. How do I honor somebody who is not honorable? That is a real question. That is a real struggle. How do I honor my father when he doesn't know the Lord? When he might be a little bit crazy? When he's just a scoundrel. You can't trust him. How do I honor him? Well, I think one of the ways that we honor our parents, especially when they're not honorable, is that we learn from their mistakes. See, we have a tendency to become like our parents, even if we don't want to. We've all had that moment when we said something, when we did something, and we're like, oh no, that was Dad. Or, oh no, that was Mom. Right? We see our parents in ourselves. We've all had that moment. So one of the ways that we can honor our parents is by learning from their mistakes and doing differently. Maybe that means that I don't spend a lot of time with my folks because they're not honorable, because they're going to corrupt my kids. And as much as that may hurt me, as much as that may be difficult, the best way I can do to honor them is to act honorably. That's difficult. This is not easy stuff. Maybe that means everybody has that good thing in them, right? We can honor that which is honorable. Maybe they have one good thing in them. Maybe they have a couple good things. They have some good qualities. Every once in a while they do something right. We can honor that, and we should. But we need to be honest about what is right and what is wrong. And sometimes the best way for us to honor our parents is to live differently. So we need to give great weight to what they say. That doesn't mean we have to obey them, but it does mean we have to honor them. We do have to do what is right. So we see these two different things at play then. We are to obey our parents when we're under their control, when we're under their house. And then when that day comes when we fly from the nest and we are on our own, we are to still honor them. We're always to honor our parents, to give great weight to what they say. Doesn't mean we're out of their guidance. It means that we simply are giving great weight to what they say. We're honoring who they are and their experiences in life, understanding they have some wisdom. They have a reason for why they do things the way they do. So what else does God expect of our kids? What does God expect of children? We'll turn over to Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1. The wise father Solomon said, starting in verse 8, he says, "Hear, my son, your father's instructions, and forsake not your mother's teachings. For they are graceful garlands upon your head and pendants around your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not concede." So there's two things that we learn from the pages of the book of Proverbs. And the first is that we are to learn from our parents. We're to learn from them. They have had experiences. They have done things that we have yet to do. And we should learn from their mistakes. We should learn from what they're telling us. When mom and dad tell you, hey, you shouldn't do that, it's not coming out of, I'm going to destroy your fun in life. That's not what it's coming out of. It's, I want you to avoid the heartaches that I've gone through. So we need to learn from our parents. Learn the lessons that they have to teach us. And we need to avoid doing evil. Right? Those are two major things that we are expected as children to do. To avoid evil and to learn from our parents. And the book of Proverbs is all about learning from the wise father Solomon. As Solomon is reflecting back upon his life over in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, as he's concluding his thoughts upon his life, he says in verse 1, he says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of evil come, and the years draw near, which you will say, I have no pleasure within them." So Solomon tells us that we are to serve God when we're young. We're to seek God while we're still young, not to sow wild oats when we're young. When we've had our fun, we'll turn back to God. No, real true life comes from serving God from when we're young. All of our life. And we know this is true, and we see this to be true when we look at the end of Ecclesiastes. Look there at verse 13. He says, "For the end of the matter is this, all has been heard." He says, "Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man." This is the whole of who we are as humanity. We are to fear God and to keep His commandments. And obviously this begins when we're young, and this goes all until God calls us home. We are called to seek God. So that's another thing that we as children are expected to do. Now Jesus was a good example of this. Right there in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. So Jesus grew emotionally, intellectually, He grew physically, and He grew spiritually. And in doing so, and as He matured, He gained favor both with God and with mankind, with His fellow man. And isn't that the goal of all of us, to grow and mature? Right? That's our goal, is to grow and mature, to become a person who is capable of living a productive life. This is our goal as parents, to raise kids who are sound in mind, sound in body, and sound in spirit. Now the question we then need to ask is, what is the result? if we do these things, if we are honoring and obeying our parents, if we're seeking God, if we're learning from our parents, what is the result of kids who do this? We'll turn over to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 4. We're going to look here in verse 12. He says, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." So Paul tells Timothy that the young are to set an example. We're to set high expectations upon our kids. Now, when they fail, we're not to condemn them. We're to come alongside and to teach them and train them, be there for them. But we're to set high expectations for our kids. They are to set an example for us in the way in which they live, in life, in love, and faith, and in purity. This is a tall order. This is challenging. When I was growing up, as I was graduating from high school, I was given the book Do Hard Things by the Harris Brothers. They were my age-ish at the time, so they were like, seniors in high school when they wrote this book. And they began to give examples of other teenagers, other young adults who were doing things that everyone said, "No, you're too young for that." And yet they were succeeding at these challenging tasks. And their challenge for young adults was do hard things. Expect great things of yourself. Expect yourself to reach a high standard. Don't just expect yourself to be able to, have fun and play video games. Expect more of yourself. And I think that is true of every generation. We should expect great things of ourselves. But there's one other thing that we need to keep in mind that we as children are expected by God to do. Look over there in chapter 5 of 1 Timothy, starting in verse 4. Paul says, "But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing for God in the sight of God." Our responsibility to our parents does not end simply because we get older. At some point, the roles reverse. Our parents began to take care of us. They nurtured us. They taught us. They trained us. And eventually those roles reverse, and we now have to take care of our parents as they age. Maybe we have to take care of our grandparents as they age. This is the responsibility of children. Not children, right? Children. When we get older, it doesn't mean that this responsibility to our parents ends. We're to always honor them, and one of the ways that we honor them is by taking care of them as they reach those golden years, as they look forward to their eternal reward. We're to take care of them, and that is an important responsibility. And we as the church should not overlook that. And I know many of you are doing that. Many of you are concerned about your parents. Many of you are taking care of them. And God bless you for that hard work. So we begin to see a complicated and challenging lesson then in how and what God expects of kids. And it's not just the little tykes that God is talking to, it's all of us. We as the church, we're expected to do these things. So just as a quick recap, we as the church need to value family, understand the value of family, understand the implications of family, understand that we are a family. We also need to understand that children are to obey their parents, and that we're always to honor our parents, that we are to take care of them as they reach those older years, that we are to learn from our parents, that we are to honor our parents, that we are to set an example within our youth, follow God from our youth, and to do that until God calls us home. This is a challenging lesson, but I think it's one that applies to our life. I think it's one that we can apply to our life and must apply to our life. And what kind of an example will we be to the world if we will live this out? If we will take care of our parents when they age, if we will honor them at all times, if we'll walk that difficult path of how do I honor my folks? If we as the church can assist you in any way in that regard, Maybe you need prayers. Maybe you simply need a shoulder to cry on, somebody to encourage you to continue on. However, we as the church can help you. We invite you to come and to let that need be known as we stand and sing.